Hello everyone, I am Professor Vinayak Mirashkar, Assistant Professor of Commerce, Government First Grade College, Navalgund. In this video, we will be discussing about standard auditing practices. So this is the second video of second chapter, Principles and Practice of Auditing. In the first video of this second chapter, we have seen overview and standard setting process. So in this video, we will be continuing with the standard auditing practices, that is from SAP 1 to SAP 11. So for every video, as we had objectives, even for this session also, we have two learning objectives. So one is to understand standard auditing practices. Another is to enable you, that is to enable students to understand SAP 1 to SAP 11. Standard Auditing Practice 1, that is SAP 1. The Council of ICAI, that is Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, has issued a statement on standard auditing practice in the April 1985. The statement describes the basic principles which governs the auditor's professional responsibilities and which should be complied with whenever an audit is carried out. Standard auditing practice, that is SAP 1, describes the 9 basic principles that governs the procedure of auditing. It lists out the role and responsibility of an auditor and his general code of conduct during an audit. So we will look into these principles in brief. The principles are like this. The first principle is integrity, independence and objectivity. So integrity, independence and objectivity relies on again SAP 2. So here these standard auditing practices from SAP 1 to SAP 11 are correlated to one another. They are linked to one another. So if we start studying about one as a standard auditing practice, so we may come across the second aspect or second SAP. The auditor has to be honest while auditing. So as we know, auditor has to certify books of accounts written by accountant. Therefore, it is must that the auditor has to be honest. He cannot be favoring the organization. He must remain objective throughout the whole process. His integrity must not allow any malpractices. So as we have read, as we have discussed in the class, that auditor has to be honest in his duty. He should not favor the organization. He must act in accordance with standard auditing practices. He must act in accordance with auditing laws. He must act in accordance with the standards which are being given time to time. Another important principle is independence. So one was integrity. Integrity, auditor should not allow any malpractices and he has to be honest towards his task. The second important principle is independence. So this independence, we say it is applicable to both internal as well as external auditor, but to more extent it is applicable to external auditor. Why? Because he is independent of his decision. Though internal auditor is working as an employee, but even he has a chance of being given independent decision. So the auditor cannot have any interest in their organization he is auditing, which allows him to be independent and impartial at all the time. ಸೊ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವೇನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂದರೆ, ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಪರಿಶೋಧನೆಯನ್ನು ರೂಪಿಸುವಂತಹ ಈ ಮೂಲ ತತ್ವಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ತತ್ವಗಳು ಅಂದರೆ ಪ್ರಾಮಾಣಿಕತೆ, ವಾಸ್ತವಿಕತೆ ಮತ್ತು ಸ್ವಾತಂತ್ರ್ಯ ಅಂತ ಏನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ ನಾವು, ಅದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲಿ ಇಂಟಿಗ್ರಿಟಿ, ಇಂಡಿಪೆಂಡೆನ್ಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟಿವಿಟಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ. ಸೊ ಪ್ರಾಮಾಣಿಕತೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಪರಿಶೋಧಕನು ತನ್ನ ಪ್ರಾಮಾಣಿಕ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನದಿಂದ ಪ್ರಾಮಾಣಿಕವಾಗಿ ಕಂಪನಿಯ ಲೆಕ್ಕಪತ್ರಗಳನ್ನು ಪರಿಶೀಲನೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಪರಿಶೀಲನೆ ಮಾಡುವಾಗ ಕಂಪನಿಗೆ ಯಾವುದೇ ತರಹದ ಫೇವರನ್ನು ಮಾಡಬಾರ್ದು. ಸೊ ಕಂಪನಿಗೆ ಅವರು ಫೇವರ್ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋದರೆ ಆಡಿಟಿಂಗ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ಡ್ಸ್ ಏನಾಗ್ತವೆ ಹೇಳ್ರಿ, ವಯೋಲೇಟ್ ಆಗ್ತವೆ. ಸೊ ಅದನ್ನು ಮಾಡಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಆಡಿಟರ್, ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಪರಿಶೋಧಕ ತನ್ನ ವೃತ್ತಿಗೆ ಯಾವುದೇ ಥರದ ಮೋಸವನ್ನು ಮಾಡಬಾರ್ದು. ಅದ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಆಡಿಟರು ತನ್ನ ಕೆಲಸವನ್ನು ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರವಾಗಿ ಮಾಡುವಂತಿರಬೇಕು, ತನ್ನ ಒಪಿನಿಯನ್ನನ್ನು ಇಂಡಿಪೆಂಡೆಂಟ್ ಆಗಿ ತಿಳಿಸುವಂತಹ ಸಾಮರ್ಥ್ಯವನ್ನು ಹೊಂದಿರಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಈ ತತ್ವ ಹೇಳ್ತದೆ. ದ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಪ್ರಿನ್ಸಿಪಲ್ ಈಸ್ ಕಾನ್ಫಿಡೆನ್ಷಿಯಾಲಿಟಿ. ಸೊ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಕಾನ್ಫಿಡೆನ್ಷಿಯಾಲಿಟಿಗೆ ಗೌಪ್ಯತೆ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಸೊ ಈ ಗೌಪ್ಯತೆ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಈ ಕ್ಲೈಂಟ್ ಹಾಗೂ ಆಡಿಟರ್ ಈ ಇಬ್ಬರ ನಡುವೆನೇ ಈ ಗೌಪ್ಯತೆ ಇರಬೇಕು. ಆಡಿಟರು ಯಾವ ಕಂಪನಿಯ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಆಡಿಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದಾನೆ ಆ ವಿಷಯವನ್ನು ಹೊರಗಡೆಯಲ್ಲೂ ಚರ್ಚೆಗೆ ತರಬಾರದು. ಸೊ ತಂದರೆ ಕಾನ್ಫಿಡೆನ್ಷಿಯಾಲಿಟಿ ಅನ್ನೋಂಥ ಪ್ರಿನ್ಸಿಪಲ್ಲು ವಯೋಲೇಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ವಿ ವಿಲ್ ಸಿ ವಾಟ್ ಈಸ್ ದೇರ್ ಇನ್ ದಿಸ್ ಕಾನ್ಫಿಡೆನ್ಷಿಯಾಲಿಟಿ. ದ ಆಡಿಟರ್ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ access to a lot of sensitive financial information of the organization. It is important that he respects the confidential nature of such information and documentation. He cannot disclose any sensitive information to any third parties unless it is required by law. So if it is required by law, yes, auditor has full right to disclose those information to outside parties. And he must always be careful with his documents and certificates that the organization entrust to him. So that is what the principle confidentiality says. ತತ್ವ ಗೌಪ್ಯತೆ ಅಂತ ಏನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ, ಆ ಗೌಪ್ಯತೆ ತತ್ವವನ್ನು ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಪರಿಶೋಧಕ ಕಂಪಲ್ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ಪರಿಪಾಲಿಸಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತದೆ. Then moving towards the third principle, that is skill and competencies. ಸೊ ಜಾಣ್ಮೆ ಮತ್ತು ಸಾಮರ್ಥ್ಯ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಇದು ಒಂದು ಆಡಿಟರ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಇರುವಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಗುಣಲಕ್ಷಣ. ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ ಇರಬೇಕು, ಆಮೇಲೆ ಕಾಂಪಿಟೆನ್ಸಿ ಇರಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ. ಜಾಣ್ಮೆ ಮತ್ತು ಅವನಲ್ಲಿ ಆ ಸಾಮರ್ಥ್ಯ ಇರಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ ನಾವು. ಸೊ ಸಾಮರ್ಥ್ಯ ಯಾವುದು? ಪ್ರೊಫೆಷ್ನಲ್ ಸಾಮರ್ಥ್ಯ, ಪ್ರೊಫೆಷ್ನಲ್ ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ಸ್. ದ ಆಡಿಟರ್ ಮಸ್ಟ್ ಬಿ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೀರಿಯನ್ಸ್ಡ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಟ್ರೈನ್ಡ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಪ್ರೊಸೀಜರ್ ಆಫ್ ಆಡಿಟಿಂಗ್. That is, must be qualified as an auditor, and as a professional he must be up to date on recent changes, announcements, rules, etc. ಸೊ ಆಡಿಟರ್ ಅಂತ ಅನಿಸಿಕೊಳ್ಳುವನು ತನ್ನ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಷನ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಆಗಿರುವಂತಹ ಬದಲಾವಣೆಗಳನ್ನು, ಅನೌನ್ಸ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ಗಳನ್ನು ಅವನು ತಿಳಿದುಕೊಂಡಿರಬೇಕು. ಆವಾಗ ನಾವು ಅವನಿಗೆ ಏನಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ? ಕ್ವಾಲಿಫೈಡ್ ಆಡಿಟರ್ ಅಂತೀವಿ. ಆ ಕ್ವಾಲಿಫೈಡ್ ಅಂತ ಅನಿಸ್ಕೋಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಅವನಲ್ಲಿ ಆ ಆಡಿಟ್ ಮಾಡುವಂಥ ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ಲು, ಸಾಮರ್ಥ್ಯ, ಜಾಣ್ಮೆ ಅವನಲ್ಲಿ ಇರಬೇಕು. ಈ ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ ಮತ್ತು ಜಾಣ್ಮೆ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಅದು ಓವರ್ ಅ ಪೀರಿಯಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ದೇರ್ಫೋರ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ತತ್ವ ಏನಿದೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಕಾಂಪಿಟೆನ್ಸಿ ಆಫ್ ಆಡಿಟರ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಮ್ಯಾಟರ್ಸ್ ಫಾರ್ ಆಡಿಟಿಂಗ್. ಸೊ ಇಫ್ ನೆಸಸರಿ ಹಿ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಅಂಡರ್ಗೋ ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗ್. ಸೊ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಆ ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದರೆ, ಆ ಕಾಂಪಿಟೆನ್ಸಿ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂದರೆ ಆ ಆಡಿಟರ್ ಕೂಡ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು ಹೇಳಿ ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗಿಗೆ ಹೋಗಿ ಅವನ್ನು ಕಲ್ತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬರಬಹುದು. ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಇಫ್ ನೆಸಸರಿ ಹಿ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಅಂಡರ್ಗೋ ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ವರ್ಕ್ಶಾಪ್ ಟು ಸ್ಟೇ ಅಪ್ ಟು ಡೇಟ್ ವಿತ್ ದ ರೀಸೆಂಟ್ ಆಡಿಟಿಂಗ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಅಕೌಂಟಿಂಗ್ ಪ್ರೊಸೀಜರ್ಸ್. ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್, GST ಮೊದಲು ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ, ಹೊಸದಾಗಿ ಇಂಪ್ಲಿಮೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಂಥ ಒಂದು ಗೂಡ್ಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಸರ್ವಿಸಸ್ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ರೂಲ್ಸ್. ಸೊ ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಜ್ಞಾನ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ, ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ಹೊಸದಿದೆ. ಸೊ ಇದನ್ನು ಅವ್ರು ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ? ಕಲ್ತ್ಕೊಂಡು ವ್ಯಾಟಿನ ನಾಲೆಜ್ ಇದ್ದವರು ಮತ್ತೆ ಎಲ್ಲಿಗೆ GSTಗೆ ಅಪ್ಡೇಟ್ ಆಗಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ GSTಯಲ್ಲೂ ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಸೀನ್ ಮೆನಿ ಚೇಂಜಸ್, ರೇಟ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಬದಲಾವಣೆಗಳು ಆದವು. ಸೊ ಆ ಬದಲಾವಣೆಗಳು ಯಾರಿಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿರಬೇಕು? ಆಡಿಟರಿಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿರಬೇಕು. ಆ ಬದಲಾವಣೆಗಳನ್ನು ಅವನು ಅಭ್ಯಸಿಸಬೇಕು. ಸೊ ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ GST ವಾಸ್ ಇಂಟ್ರೊಡ್ಯೂಸ್, ಆಡಿಟರ್ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಟು ಅಪ್ಡೇಟ್ ಹೀಸ್ ನಾಲೆಜ್ ಬೈ ಲರ್ನಿಂಗ್ GST. ಸೊ ಮೀನಿಂಗ್ ಟು ಸೇ ದ ಆಡಿಟರ್ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಟು ಬಿ ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಕಾಂಪಿಟೆನ್ಸ್ ಟುವರ್ಡ್ಸ್ ಹೀಸ್ professional qualities. Then coming towards the fourth principle, that is work performed by others. The scope of audit at the times can be very vast. So an auditor has employees, delegates and other people who work under him. However, the auditor will continue to be fully responsible for the work done by these people working for him. So the auditor must carefully supervise and review such work and be reasonably sure of the accuracy of such work. ಅಂದರೆ ಈ ಆಡಿಟರ್ ಅನ್ನೋರು ತಮ್ಮ ಕೆಲಸವನ್ನು ಅವ್ರು ಬೇರೆಯವರಿಗೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಡೆಲಿಗೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಅ ಬಿಗ್ ವರ್ಕ್, ದೊಡ್ಡ ಒಂದು ಸಮುದ್ರ ಅದು. ಸೊ ಒಂದು ಬಿಗ್ ಕಂಪನಿಯ ಆಡಿಟ್ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ತೀವಂದರೆ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಅ ಬಿಗ್ ಓಷಿಯನ್. ಸೊ ಆ ವರ್ಕ್ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಅವ್ರು ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೋದು? ಅಸಿಸ್ಟೆನ್ಸನ್ನು ಇಟ್ಕೋಬಹುದು. ಅಸಿಸ್ಟೆಂಟನ್ನು ಇಟ್ಕೋಬೋದು, ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯೀಸನ್ನು ಇಟ್ಕೋಬೋದು. ಸೊ ವರ್ಕು ಈ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯೀಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರಂದರೆ ಆ ಆಡಿಟ್ ರೆಸ್ಪಾನ್ಸಿಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಅವ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ ಶಿಫ್ಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಅಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ದ ಕಂಪ್ಲೀಟ್ ರೆಸ್ಪಾನ್ಸಿಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಈಸ್ ಅಗೇನ್ ಆನ್ ದ ಹೆಡ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಆಡಿಟರ್ ತಲೆ ಮೇಲೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ರೆಸ್ಪಾನ್ಸಿಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಬಟ್ ಅವನ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಅವನಿಗೆ ಸೂಪರ್ವೈಸ್ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಈ ಜನ ಎಲ್ಲ ವರ್ಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತಾರೆ. ಸೊ ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ವರ್ಕ್ ಪರ್ಫಾರ್ಮ್ಡ್ ಬೈ ಅದರ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ. Then moving towards a very important aspect of auditing, that is we say documentation, ದಸ್ತಾವೇಜುಕರಣ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೇವೆ ನಾವು. ಸೊ ದಸ್ತಾವೇಜುಕರಣ SAP 3 ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಇನ್ ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಕೇಸಸ್ ದ ಆಡಿಟರ್ ಮೇಂಟೈನ್ಸ್ ಆ್ಯನ್ ಆಡಿಟ್ ಬುಕ್. ಆಡಿಟರ್ ಹತ್ರ ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಪರಿಶೋಧನಾ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಅಂತ ಒಂದಿರ್ತದೆ. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಆ ಪುಸ್ತಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಆಡಿಟ್ ಬಗೆಗಿನ ಯಾವುದಾದ್ರೂ ಡೌಟ್ ಬಂತು ಅಂದರೆ, ಯಾವುದಾದ್ರು ವೆರಿಫಿಕೇಷನ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರಂದರೆ, ಯಾವುದು ವೆರಿಫಿಕೇಷನ್ ಮಾಡಿದರು, ಯಾವುದು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಅವೆಲ್ಲವನ್ನು ಇವರು ನೋಟ್ ಮಾಡಿರ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಒಂದು ಆಡಿಟ್ ಪ್ಲ್ಯಾನ್ ಕೂಡ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಆಡಿಟ್ ಪ್ಲ್ಯಾನ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮುಂದೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಏನು ಬರ್ತದೆ, SAP ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಡೀಟೇಲ್ ಆಗಿ ನೋಡೋಣ. ಅದ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಆಡಿಟ್ ಫೈಲ್ ಅಂತ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಆಡಿಟ್ ಫೈಲಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಕಂಟೆಂಟ್ಗಳು ಬರ್ತವೆ. So that is important. The auditor keeps a record of important documents which respects to his audit work. As it is an evidence of work the auditor has to done, and the client is inclined to these documents and files if he wishes to inspect the work. So documentation ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಯಾವುದನ್ನು ಪ್ರೂವ್ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಈ ಡಾಕ್ಯುಮೆಂಟೇ ಮುಂದೆ ನಮಗೆ ಆಡಿಟ್ ಎವಿಡೆನ್ಸ್ ಆಗಿ ಪರಿಣಮಿಸ್ತದೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಆಡಿಟರ್ ಮಸ್ಟ್ have clear documentation, clear segregation of files, and clear segregation of all the documents what he is collecting which related to his auditing work. Audit process alli next barodu the next SAP is SAP 4. So this is very crucial, I can say, errors and frauds. So ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಇದನ್ನು ತಪ್ಪುಗಳು ಮತ್ತು ಮೋಸಗಳು ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಸೊ ತಪ್ಪುಗಳು ಅಂದರೆ ಸಹಜವಾಗಿ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲದೆ ನಡೆಯುವಂತಹ ತಪ್ಪುಗಳು. ಸೊ ಅದು ತಾತ್ವಿಕ ತಪ್ಪು ಇರಬಹುದು, ಬರೆಯುವಾಗ ಆಗುವಂತಹ ತಪ್ಪು ಇರಬಹುದು, ಬರದೇ ಇರುವಂತಹ ತಪ್ಪು ಇರಬಹುದು. ಸೊ ಅನ್ಇಂಟೆನ್ಷನಲ್, ಯಾವುದೇ ಕೆಟ್ಟ ಉದ್ದೇಶದಿಂದ ಮಾಡಿದಂತಹ ಆದಂತಹ ತಪ್ಪಿಗೆ ನಾವು ಎರರ್ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಕಂಪನಿಗೆ ನುಕ್ಸಾನ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಥವಾ ಕಂಪನಿಗೆ ಡಿಸ್ಟರ್ಬ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಕಂಪನಿಗೆ ನಾವು ಏನು ಹಾನಿ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಏನು ಇಂಟೆನ್ಷನ್ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಲ್ಲ, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಮೋಸ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಸೊ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲಿ ಏನದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಎರರ್ಸ್ ಮತ್ತು ಫ್ರಾಡ್ಸ್ ಆಗಿ ಡಿವೈಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಸೊ ಎರರ್ಸ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಎರರ್ಸ್ ರೆಫರ್ಸ್ ಟು ಅನ್ಇಂಟೆನ್ಷನಲ್ ಮಿಸ್ಟೇಕ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಇನ್ಫಾರ್ಮೇಷನ್ ಬೈ ಒನ್ ಆರ್ ಮೋರ್ ಇಂಡಿವಿಜುವಲ್ಸ್ ಅಮಾಂಗ್ ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜ್ಮೆಂಟ್, ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯೀಸ್ ಆರ್ ಥರ್ಡ್ ಪಾರ್ಟೀಸ್. ಸೊ ಎರರ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಯಾವುದೇ ಉದ್ದೇಶ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ, ಯಾವುದೇ ಕೆಟ್ಟ ಉದ್ದೇಶ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಅಂಕಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಆಗುವಂತಹ ಬದಲಾವಣೆಗಳು. ಸೊ ಅದು ಇಂಡಿವಿಜುವಲಿಂದ ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು, ಅಥವಾ ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜ್ಮೆಂಟಿಂದ ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು, ಅಕೌಂಟೆಂಟಿಂದ ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು, ಅಥವಾ ಯಾವುದೇ ಥರ್ಡ್ ಪಾರ್ಟಿಯಿಂದನೂ ಕೂಡ ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು. ಸೊ ತಪ್ಪುಗಳನ್ನು ನಾವು ನೋಡಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಸೊ ಎರರ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ಆಫ್ ಮೆನಿ ವೆರೈಟೀಸ್. ಮೇ ಬಿ ಪ್ರಿನ್ಸಿಪಲ್ ಎರರ್, ಎರರ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಕಮಿಷನ್, ಎರರ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಒಮಿಷನ್, compensating errors. Like this, we have seen 4 varieties of error in first module. So that errors and frauds are covered in standard auditing practice 4. Then moving towards the fraud. So very biggest thing. Now we have seen many companies names when it comes to fraud, financial fraud, because of which many companies have lost their existence. In worldwide, if you can see, when the term comes, I'll remember Enron and WorldCom, and if I think of India, if I think of our country, so I'll be remembered Satyam. So we know what has happened with the Satyam case. So Mr. Ramalingan Raju, so because of his and his team's misappropriation of financial statements which is related to general reserve, so the company has lost its existence. Now the company is being taken over by Tech Mahindra. So that is a different story. But the company, Satyam company, which was in existence for plenty of years and which was performing well in stock market also, lost its existence because of frauds. So the fraud is referred to an intentional misappropriation of financial information by one or more individuals among management, employees or third parties. So when a fraud takes place, reporting responsibility of auditor, we can rely upon these 4. The reporting responsibility of auditor should be communicate his findings to management on timely basis. So to avoid To avoid, the major damage which happens to the organization, auditor has to communicate immediately the findings of his to management on timely basis. So otherwise, it will be the responsibility of the auditor if something goes wrong to the company. Auditor should consider implications of circumstances on the true and fair view. So at the beginning only, we have discussed something related to true and fair view. The auditor's primary task is to find errors and frauds where his intention is to bring fairness in financial accounting, fairness in financial statements, that is with the objective of true and fair view of financial statements. So when a fraud is significant, it must be disclosed in the financial statements. So that's what reporting responsibility the auditor has. Moving towards the dependent, I can say. So dependent on audit documentation, that is audit evidence. So audit evidence is in SAP-5. So SAP-5 is relying upon audit evidence. So evidence generated out of documentations. So the auditor must collect enough evidence to support his final opinion. So here auditor's final opinion will be in writing form. So we have fifth module wherein we have to discuss about audit report. So in report, auditor must give his opinion regarding what he has audited and what is the status of the company. So auditor may give in two forms, qualified and unqualified report. So to give such opinion, he should have enough evidence in his hand. So that evidence is collection of such evidence is done by compliance and substantive procedures. So substantive procedures, there are two sources of these evidences. One is from internal source, another is from external source. And also external sources of evidence are always more reliable than internal evidences. So that auditor has to keep in mind. Let us see from where does the auditor gets all these evidences. So we have seen two parties, we have seen two evidences. So one we have said external and we have said internal. So we have said external evidences are more reliable than the internal. So external evidences we receive generally from third parties and internally obviously from internal control system or from internal employees. So to obtain these evidences, auditor may follow 5 methods. One, through surprise inspection of documents. Another, at the time of auditing, by observation he can collect evidence. If not from observation, he can inquire. He can inquire with internal people, he can inquire with the management and confirm about such evidences. Or by computation also he can come to a conclusion and he may have that computation itself as an evidence. Then through analytical review of what he has collected through his auditing process, he can generate his audit evidence. Moving towards the next standard auditing practice, that is SAP-6. SAP-6 relies on risk assessment and internal control. So here in auditing, internal control plays a very important role. Internal control and internal check. The responsibility of the management towards internal control and check plays a very important role in assessment of risk by auditor. So internal control, what do you mean by this? We will see. All the policies and procedures adopted by the management of a concern to ensure orderly, efficient conduct of its business. So the very much objective of internal control is orderly and efficient conduct of business. So if control is good, if internal control is efficient, then the risk of assessment becomes very easy. The risk of assessment is zero, I can say, to the auditor. Then moving towards why internal control is needed. So without internal control, can the company be efficient? Can the company be risk free? So for this we need to study the objectives of internal control. The transactions are recorded in accordance with the management's authorization. So every transaction occurs in the organization should be transferred, recorded accordance with the management's authorization, and transactions should be recorded in prompt manner without any changes in it, without any malpractices, without any window dressed numbers. So along with that, the internal control objective is to safeguard company's assets from unauthorized access. So if they safeguard, yes, then assets are verified at reasonable intervals. So the assets which are in use of the organization should be verified in reasonable intervals, whether they are mainly used for the company or for use for personal use of management members. So this internal control has to verify. One is whether the transaction is recorded as per the authorization of management, and the transaction should be recorded promptly, and safeguarding of company's assets from unauthorized accesses, and verification of assets in reasonable intervals. Here, internal control can be evaluated by following generally these four methods. So to have a strong internal control, for evaluation of it, we can go for oral approach. We can call employees of the organization and talk to them orally, draft certain conclusions, take information from them. So that is one method of evaluation. Another is narrative records. Previous records can be taken into account in writing, and those can be evaluated for internal control. The very best method is questionnaire method. In questionnaire method, draft certain probable questions, give certain alternatives to answer, and circulate those questionnaires to the employees. So ask them to fill it and draft conclusion based on the analysis what we have done based on these questionnaires received. And for them, yes, you can go for flowchart also. So the answers can be put up in flowcharts and can be shown the favorable and unfavorable decisions of the organization, which may directly or indirectly affect our auditing work. Standard auditing practice 7, that is relying on the work of an internal auditor. So here, internal auditor, we might have come across, he is an internal person, works as a staff of the organization, and for the work done by him will get salary for it instead of fees which the external auditor gets. Internal auditor, he is an accounting professional appointed by the management to examine the books of accounts and organization's internal control system. So if the role of internal control is performed effectively, the task of external auditor becomes very easy. So if the accounts are in one stage verified in accordance with the accounting and auditing standards, then the work of external auditor becomes very easy. So here comes with the two differences, one with the internal auditor and external auditor. So the relationship between these two can be seen with these point of differences. The scope of internal auditor decided by the management. Why? Because he is an employee of the organization and he has to act in accordance with the management. But the external auditor's scope is decided by the statute. So based on what kind of auditing he is doing, that depends upon these scope. The status of these two, if you compare, he is a dependent. Internal auditor is dependent on management. He is an employee of the management, whereas external auditor is independent of his decision, independent of his opinion. He is not at all related to management. He is an external person, comes for auditing, does his job, and takes his remuneration, he go back. So appointment term is also, the internal auditor is appointed by the management, whereas external auditor is appointed by the shareholders. So it is just because of agency problems. Responsibility. Internal auditor is responsible and reporting to management, whereas our external auditor has to report to its company's shareholders. Then relying on internal auditor's work and relying on internal audit. If the internal auditor's work is adequate for audit purpose, then it has to evaluate it with the help of this matrix which is on your screen. One matrix is objectivity of internal audit, the internal auditor's technical competency, internal auditor's professionalism and communication between internal and external auditor. So these four aspects are relying on internal auditor's work and internal audit. If these four works good, the task of external auditor becomes very simple. Then moving towards the next aspect, that is the next standard auditing practice, that is standard auditing practice 8. An audit plan allows auditors plan out his work and enable him to work more efficient and timely. So for every task we do, if we have planned it, if we have executed what we have planned, then we may not face any differences. So difference arises when planned and action taken, if there is a difference in these two. So because of which we do all works with some planning. It may be a short term or long term plan. Even in auditing also, plan is compulsorily required. Why? Because it's a technical task and it is a go on processing a task. Therefore audit plan is necessary. So audit planning is under standard auditing practice 8. Every audit plan is different as it has to customized according to the type of organization, the kind of business they conduct, the scope of the audit, the efficiency of internal control, etc. So auditor's plan varies. Auditor has to plan differently for different organization. So one organization, one plan may not be suitable to another organization. So if a large scale plan, if we bring it to a small scale industry, it is not suitable. Therefore, a plan of auditor has to be customized and the auditor has to act in accordance with the plan preferred for each sector. So as we say, for everything there is a need of plan. Even auditor also have a customized plan in accordance with the size, kind and conduct of his audit work. So we will see now why there is a need of audit plan. So audit plan importance and its needs we can see with this pyramid. We'll go from below. Coordination between auditor and experts is necessary for need of audit plan. Then proper utilization of aspirants. Moving towards the next, that is expeditious completion of work, identification of potential problems, to know the key areas of planning, the key areas to be audited. Then in planning we have two varieties again. The two aspects we have, generally developing an overall plan and developing an audit program. So developing an overall audit plan, an auditor should seek term of appointment, his duties and nature of a report which he has to give. Along with that, accounting policies adopted by the client, guidelines issued by ICAI, identifying important areas and materiality, reliability of internal control system and involvement of required experts. Then audit program. So detailed plan of audit work to be performed, specifying the procedures to be followed in verifying the each item. So audit program is a detailed plan of audit work. The audit program contains the following aspect. The contents of audit programs are like this: kind of client and accounting year, audit procedures followed by the client, distribution of audit work between employees, the timetable prepared for auditing and a review of the plan. So the audit program is a detailed plan of audit work to be performed by specifying the procedures to be followed in verifying each item. So these items are including of accounting year procedures, audit work timetable, and a review of the plan prepared by auditor. Then moving towards the eighth principle, that is accounting system and internal control. The auditor has to assure that the accounts of the organizations are accurate and represent a true and fair view picture of the financial status of the company, and also the auditor must ensure that all the material information has been recorded in the accounts. Testing the internal control system is very important as it helps the determining the same. Then the ninth principle is audit conclusions and reporting. After the auditor collects all evidences, he must now form his opinion on the basis of the following criteria. 1. The opinion is based on all relevant accounting standards which were applied at all the times. Financial statements are in compliance with all regulations and statutory requirements. All the material information has been disclosed in financial information. Then the last aspect is on SAP-11, which is a representation by management in auditing. So the representation of management is a very important role of management which plays in auditing. The management representation is a letter of client's organization to the auditor in writing as a part of audit evidence. So the letter which is received by the management by the auditor itself is an audit evidence to an auditor to perform his task. It reduces the evidence, reduces the letter representation of management, reduces misunderstandings between management's responsibility for the financial statements. The purpose of management representation is to confirm representations whether they are explicitly or implicitly given to the auditor, to indicate the document the continuing appropriateness of such a representation, to reduce the possibility of misunderstanding concerning matters subject to representation. The management representation can be seen in the following ground. One, which is the basis for preparation of financial statements, the share capital shown in the balance sheet, fixed assets shown in the balance sheet, depreciation charged as per which method, how depreciation is calculated, what is the percentage of depreciation calculated, and security deposits, a royalty if received, related party transactions, bank balances, employees benefits, loans and advances, frauds and errors, and others. Then SAP-13 relies on audit materiality. So audit materiality, the concept is very fundamental to the process of recognition, aggregation, classification, and presentation of financial statements. So presentation of financial information, that is disclosure of financial information, we have seen, we may come across in Accounting Standard 1, where Accounting Standard 1 describes about disclosure requirements, disclosure of accounting policies. So definition of Accounting Standard 1, disclosure of accounting policies issued by ICAI defines materiality as items, the knowledge which might influence the decision of the user of a financial statement. So now we are at the last stage of this session, in which we will just summarize. We will summarize what we have seen so far, that is from SAP 1 basic principles governing audit, SAP 2 objectivity, scope of audit and financial statements, SAP 3 documentation, audit evidences, study and evaluation of accounting system, relying upon the work of internal auditor, audit planning, using the work of another auditor, a representation by management, audit materiality, audit sampling, and analytical procedures. So with this, we will conclude the session which is on standard auditing practices. Thanks you for thank you for watching.